Oh. Hi, everyone. My name is Lada Monguligin. I am a companion of the Order of the Laurel. Welcome to the class on entering A&S competitions. This class is based specifically on my experiences as both competitor and judge in various A&S competitions. Just to give you some background, I have entered East Kingdom A&S twice, and had to remember. I have also entered the Penzic Warpoint as part of the East Kingdom and Allies team. I have also done that one twice. I have also entered local, baronial A&S competitions, and I have judged Penzic Warpoint, I have judged Kingdom A&S, and I have judged other local competitions as well. So I do have experience from both sides, and this class is based specifically on that experience. It is not associated with any specific MOAS office or specific competition. So please do not, go to the competition organizers and say, but Lada said. No, I mean, I am sharing my knowledge and my experience, but, the ultimate word always falls to the organizers of the competitions. So please, be kind and courteous with them. And yeah, so unless you guys have any questions, the link is, I put the notes link in the chat so you can follow along or make additional notes for yourself. You can share that link and distribute it if you would like. That's fine. So I guess we'll get started. First, oh yes, there's a question.
No, sorry, mistake.
Oh, no problem. So first is, why do we enter A&S competitions? So there is a variety of reasons why you may want to compete, and one or more of these may apply to you when you enter. So one thing to remember is that a competition can be stressful, and some of the goals listed below in the handout can also be achieved by doing A&S displays, publishing your research in various SCA publications, or teaching classes. And it's important to be honest with yourself on your reasons and to set your expectations fairly so that you don't set yourself up for disappointment. So one of the reasons to enter would be to share your project and your knowledge with the subject with a wider audience. So, and there's could be a couple of different audiences that you may be targeting here. First of all, general audience. This is the people who will stop by and they just want to, see what you got on display at the competition. And this could be an opportunity for you to educate them about this cool thing you're doing. The depth of the conversation will end up having to largely vary on how interested they are and how much they may already or may not know about the subject matter that you're presenting on. Now, next would be your fellow artisans, particularly artisans in a same or similar parallel field. Now, this is an opportunity to bounce ideas, to geek out over the subject matter, to share your sources, kind of like just to really kind of get those creative and research juices flowing. And finally, there are your judges. The judges may be familiar with your field of study, and they may be in an adjacent field, or they may know nothing about the subject matter at hand. Depending on where they fall, your conversations with them will generally fall from one of two of the above categories. Always want to look in depth. So the more you can educate them, the better I guess ultimately the feedback you will receive from them, the more information you can share, and the more you can demonstrate your depth of knowledge off the field to them. And your judges will also ask specific questions to measure your entry against the judging criteria, of the competition, and they will give you feedback specifically based on those criteria. So you want to have your, remember, you want to have your, oh, sorry. So that, wider audience and sharing is one of the reasons that you may want to enter. Some other reasons would be you want to have your work judged against the competition criteria and receive feedback. So this kind of ties into that last category of presenting your work to the judges. Having your project judged against a specific criteria and asking specific questions can be an important step for you to identify areas of improvement in your research and where you should focus on in the future. So, for example, how challenging is your project? Should you be looking at more challenging pieces and stepping up your game, or should you be trying something a little simpler and to master the basics first? How well do you establish historical context for your project? This examines how well you can build a connection to a historical time and place, and um, with, but also, not just with your project, but also with the research that you're presenting. So this would go beyond the artistry of the project and talk about how well do you know the history of what was going on in the world around the item that you are presenting. How authentic is your piece? What kind of materials are you using, and what adjustments can you make to potentially, step the game up in that respect? Another reason you may want to enter is to raise your profile within the A&S community. And we want to be recognized for our work. We want to, we want people to see it and be like, hey, look, did you see that person and that really cool thing they did over there? So first of all, this is one of those things where you may where displaying your work will be just as good and sufficient if you're not comfortable with competing. Um, but you may want to have laurels and manches or whatever kingdom you're in, the equivalent of the grant level A&S awards. You want them to be aware of your work. You want to be on their radar for future award consideration. And that's a perfectly legitimate reason to enter, to raise your profile so people know who you are and what you do. Now, with this, remember that the higher the profile of the competition, the more likely you are to have a larger concentration of peers and grant level artisans to showcase your work to. So at your local, baronial, shire A&S competition, yes, it's going to be your local peers and your local grant level A&S awardees, but the higher you go, the more people you are going to target. At the same time, the competition level is going to increase. It's going to become more competitive. There's going to be a higher set of expectations of what it is that you what is expected of you as an entrant. Finally, to enter an A&S competition, you want to win. And I mean, it is perfectly okay to want to win. And it may mean that you get a prize. It may mean you qualify for an award or for an elected position like a champion. And these awards and these positions come with responsibility, and you need to consider them, and you need to consider the commitment that comes with those before entering. And it is okay to enter to want to win. And some people thrive in the competition environment. But remember that if your only goal is to win, it does not, and that does not happen, you're really setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment. So think of this as a test of your knowledge. Think of this as a tournament. That's how fighters, they enter a tournament to test their mettle against other combatants. Think of it the same way. So the more you enter, you get to practice. Essentially, think of it as practice. You get to practice against other artisans the way combatants practice against other combatants in a tournament. So do anybody have any questions? Okay. Um, okay, so now let's talk about different types of A&S competitions. So there are many different levels of competition. So from local themed event competitions and baronial A&S championships to larger kingdom-wide competitions and A&S and things like Kingdom A&S. And for example, in East Kingdom, something like St. Eligius, which really attracts a broad range of artisans. To finally large inter-kingdom competitions like the Pennsic War Point. But I also know like Gulf Wars has an A&S War Point, and they have their own different set of rules for that. And the higher the profile of the tournament, the higher the caliber of artisans you will go up against, and the stiffer the competition will be. But you're also more likely to connect with artisans and judges who are more familiar with your area of research, and that also means you will receive deeper feedback. So there's, pros, and I don't know if you can call them cons, but there's definitely, a benefit to entering a higher level competition, but you should also be prepared for what you're going to encounter.
Lada, we have a question in chat
Oh.
About competing against other artists. The
Yes.
question is, how do you practice against other types of artists, like sewing versus metalworking, for example? Can you talk a little bit about how some competitions have categories, whereas others it's just kind of open?
Yes, and it actually might cover it later, but I can address that now. So you're not practicing against the other artists specifically. What you're really practicing against is how well your project meets the competition criteria. So how, for example, like the East Kingdom rubric, which is used at MOAS Kingdom A&S competitions, or how well your project measures up to the St. Eligius judging rubric. And so this means that every time you enter the competition, you're going to want to look at that competition judging rubric and make sure that what you're presenting matches. This really potentially means that every single time you enter, you're rewriting your documentation to suit that specific competition. You're designing your display and tweaking what you're putting out there for that specific competition. Does that answer the question? Okay. So generally, as I mentioned, all the competitions will have some kind of rules and guidelines, and and these rules are applicable to all entries across the board. So this is how the judges help provide the arena to judge anything from an illuminated manuscript page against the stained glass panel, against the pie, against a piece of clothing. And many of these formal competitions will include either an in-person judging with time slots, or specifically, time set aside where the judges can examine documentation with entries in detail. And sometimes it will also include an in-person interview where you can talk about your piece and tell the judges more and answer questions on something that, may not be in documentation, or maybe it's something that is in your documentation, but you want to highlight it. So one type of competition that does not have a specific judging criteria is populist choice. In this situation, it is often dependent on who is at the event that day. Often, most visually striking or most unusual entry will win. This is because a lot of folks may not take the time to delve into the depth of the documentation and research presented to analyze everything and judge it specifically all against other entries. And sometimes they may go and vote for their friend, or for the project that like, oh yeah, this thing, I know this thing, it's really cool, I'm going to vote for it. And if this happens, I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's the upside of this type of competition is that they're relatively low pressure, and you do not need to be present for the formal judging. And so it might be a good get your feet wet kind of thing. So it's a good way. Hey, look, here's this really cool thing I'm doing. You show it off to a lot of people. You kind of get comfortable, and then you can say, hey, maybe now I want to enter this piece into something a little higher profile. And sometimes the judging format will run alongside with the populist choice competition. So in that case, well, there will be more than one winner. But also, if you are entering something like that, focus on the judging version of the competition if you are in it to win it. If you're just there to hey, I just want to show off my work, that's fine, that's okay. But if you are really, if you you want to be considered for that winning slot, for that winning position, then yes, tailor what you are doing towards the judging rubric that the competition will be based on. Does it make it? No, it does not make you an awful person that you dislike populist choice. Absolutely not. Because it's really it's it kind of can be a crapshoot, because it's really it's who brings what that day, and it's, as I said, whatever people see and they're like, hey, look, this thing is really pretty and shiny, or oh, look, this person has samples. They baked cookies. I get to walk away with a cookie. So yeah, it's I think I always think of popular choice as something that's good for maybe newer artisans, somebody who's not sure, as I said, get your feet wet kind of thing. So I'm intuitive. So now, what can we as artisans do to prepare for A&S competitions? So once you decide to enter a competition, there are several things you can do to prepare to maximize your success. Yes, this section is about how to maximize your score based on when you enter the competition. You are committing to the because you're committing to the possibility of winning. So here's what we can do. First of all, there are deadlines. There may be a deadline to register. There may be a deadline for when you need to submit your documentation. For example, we had an online there's been online A&S competitions, including the Kingdom one. There was a deadline to submit your artwork, to submit pictures of everything. Make sure you pay attention to those deadlines, because chances are, if you do not, you will miss out. I recently saw a post about the Laurels Challenge that some people were like, oh, right, I need to register to participate. So make sure you check what those deadlines are. Um, I see a question in the chat. I will circle back to it in just a moment. Let me get through this section. So now the project itself and the documentation. You either already have a finished piece, or you have an in-progress piece or pieces, or you're planning on making something completely new specifically for the competition that you're going to enter. You also probably already have a bunch of research done, and possibly a body of work that you completed. Oh, that's a typo. Prior to creating the entry. When you're creating your project, do your best to be as authentic as you can to period methods and materials as you can be. Yes, there are exceptions. There are certain things that are poisonous. There are certain methods that are just prohibitive. Perhaps you live in a tiny studio apartment, and there are just certain things that are not possible to achieve, like you don't have good ventilation, so maybe you're not going to be working with lead, or other poisonous materials or something. Perhaps the authentic fabric for this dress is $200 a yard, and that's not within your budget. And those are all absolutely reasonable things, this is where you will make substitutions and you will put it into your documentation explaining why you've made these substitutions. And that is okay. Remember that it is easier to do research at first and then make your entry than trying to tailor your research to the finished piece. There's nothing worse than finding out that you have finished this awesome thing and then you're trying to tie your research and you realize that something is not quite right, and that but the piece is already done and you can't go back and like change this. I've been there, which is how I know. So um and when you're doing research, you can format it any way that works best for you. For your own purposes, so that you can store it however is most comfortable. However it's easiest for you to review it and look things up and refer back to it. But for the competition entry, be sure that to put it in a format that fits the rules of the competition. If you have a limit on the number of pages, make sure you are within that limit of the number of pages. So this may mean that you need to get creative to make things fit. So for example, one of the things you could do is, hey, I have all these images of extant pieces that make my research 20 pages long. You take all those images out, you put them into an appendix, you number them, and then you reference them in your documentation that you hand to the judges. And all of a sudden, hey, I fit within those 6 pieces, and here is my appendix, which is like 10 pages long and has all my images in it. And make sure you tailor your documentation to the judging criteria. If you can obtain a judging sheet and make, and oftentimes these are available ahead of time, so you know what the criteria are, you want to make sure that you address each point you're being judged on in your documentation. A well-organized documentation will make it easier for your judges to evaluate your project and provide feedback. That also means that there's less of a chance that they might overlook something and dock you a point because they couldn't, they overlooked some piece of information that was actually in there. So some examples of that are, I'll have a line item for materials. List them out, maybe do a chart of like, these are the materials that I use. This is what the materials were used in period. This is where I made substitutions and why. It's right there for the judges. They see it, they can easily reference it back. If there's a line item on authenticity, discuss what steps you took to be authentic to the original piece. Perhaps you used period appropriate tools, or you paid extra attention to the details in the exemplar that give your piece the illusion of authenticity. Make sure you have a conclusion. Having a final conclusion or an analysis of the project is important. This is the section where you can discuss your successes and failures, acknowledge your mistakes, discuss next steps of your research. Honestly, even if the documentation, if the judging criteria does not specifically ask for it, have this in there anyway, because this shows to the judges that you are thinking ahead, that you're passionate, and also that you are the acknowledging mistakes part is very important. It really shows a lot of personal commitment to your field of study. And it can set up for further conversations to have with your judges where they can then give you additional feedback and next steps to take. Have a bibliography. This should be a separate page in your documentation where you list all your sources. Do this even if you put references as you write your documentation, even if you do either footnotes or you document it within the text. And remember to add the books, the articles, any links, list out everything, because it's easier for a judge if they're going to look at and say, hey, I want to know what sources this person used. It's easier to refer to that one sheeter versus trying to flip back through the other pages of your documentation, trying to find all these things. And No, the bibliography, as far as I know, no competition that I have ever been in has required the bibliography to be in any specific format. Just list them out, name of the book, name of the article, who wrote it, where to find it, what, like, maybe publisher, but it's not you don't have to worry about like formatting in a certain way. There's no style guide for this. Finally, do a self-evaluation. Wait, sorry, that was my cat. I'm okay. Everything is fine. She just knocked over my desk. We're all good. One moment. The cat is also still alive.
Feline difficulties. Please stand by.
Yep. Okay, and we're back. Really, cat. Self-evaluation. So you want to, you've put your research together, you've put your project together. Now take it and judge it yourself. Look at the criteria and be honest with yourself about where you are on this criteria, on this judging sheet, and see if there are things that you can do to improve. See if there are things that you can do to maximize your score. So, okay. Wait, I am now going to backtrack. That was a question, and I'm going to backtrack to that question. Any
the
advice?
question was about first time advice.
For the first time, make a point to stay with your entry and try to talk to as many people as possible because I would imagine if you're entering for the first time, your goal is to kind of, put yourself out there. So talk to as many people as possible to maximize your exposure and to get as much feedback from various people as possible. It will also, the more people you talk to, the more practice you will become in doing your presentation and presenting it to other people. So by the time the judges come around to you, you've now been through your spiel a few times, so you'll be more comfortable. I also think it's okay to let your judges know, hey, this is my first competition. And, like, please, I'm definitely looking for feedback. I'd love to know how to improve and do better next time. So let them know, because that also sets them up knowing what where the expectation for judging is. That's one of the things that I know that St. Eligius does, where they will do different levels of feedback based on what level you enter at, depending how comfortable you are with the competition. And I would definitely recommend entering something potentially, a little bit more low pressure at first, like, local, competition versus just diving off the deep board into like Kingdom A&S, for example. Yes, definitely, talk to other people about your project. Honestly, if you want to even do a dry run through at home with your family, like, that works too. So, let's see. So now you've gotten your documentation together, you got your project, now you want to design your display. So the first evaluation of your project that anyone will do is a visual one. You want to create something that's visually enticing. Do a practice display at home and tweak it as necessary. Once you are happy with what you got, take some pictures so you can reference them on the day off. One thing is have a tablecloth. A lot of competitions will provide you with a tablecloth, but not everybody does. And for some reason, putting a piece of fabric on that table just makes a huge difference. make your project the center of your display. This means potentially set it on a higher elevation than the rest of your display. Use an easel, use a mannequin, use a pedestal, etc. If you is something that is larger that you can that you can't fit on a table, put it in the most accessible area of your display, but lift it off the ground if possible. So if like maybe you have a corner of like your table is at an end, so you want to set it next to that edge of the table, don't put it behind the table, right? You don't want you want people to be able to interact with it, even if it's a don't touch interact, but you still want people to be able to look at it and examine it up close. Add your test pieces, your trials, your samples, even some of your failures to your display to show your progress. This shows the depth of the research that you've done and the depth of testing that you have done to create this piece. And it also may potentially show some inner workings. For example, if it's a doublet that had like multiple layers of stuffing, maybe you have a sample of those layers of stuffing that everybody can see what the work that really went into this piece versus just this nice fancy doublet that you have sitting right there in front of the as a finished piece. Display any period materials and tools that you may have used in creation of your work and your process. This just really, even if you didn't make them, that's fine. It's okay to purchase your tools. But you want to showcase them, like if you have hammers, if you have period brushes, you need nibs and quills, sewing needles. It really elevates your display. It adds that little bit extra of that somebody just walked into the artisan's workshop feel. Put a label on everything. Like a little label, doesn't have to be big, just a little label saying this is a quill, this is a needle, this is this kind of thread, this is this type of fabric. Just label all the things. Treat it almost as like a museum in a way where there's a little label on everything. Now have your documentation easily accessible but out of the way. So I have seen often where people will just have their multiple pages of documentation and they will just lay them flat on the table in front. And now your documentation probably takes about half of the space of your table. And that kind of, that cuts into your display space and it doesn't look all that exciting and appealing. What you can do is get one of those little like stand up, like brochure, like the brochure stands, and set it on the side of your display and just stack your documentation in there. Like a vertical book stand or something like that. Just have them right there. It can face your audience. That way they can see the documentations right there. They can grab it, they can look at it, they can put it right back once they're done reviewing it. But also have multiple copies of it. So because chances are the judges are a judging team, so you want to have 3 or 4 copies. Have one copy behind the desk for yourself to always, so you can reference. And you want to have the one for the judges. Oh, well, sorry, you want to have multiples for the judges, so each judge has their own copy, so they don't have to share. Now, a bonus thing that you could do, you can have a separate one-sheeter bullet point summary of your project. This may be for somebody who does not want to like read every single little bit of your documentation, and they don't want to read all your little labels, but they want like, look, here's this one sheet page. You can have it on a different little book stand, maybe on the other side from your documentation, but they can just look at that one thing and say, oh, this is what this person used. This is what the project is. All right. Because there's different levels of interest and how closely somebody wants to engage with the piece. If you have any books or articles or anything for your documentation, if you can bring them with you, keep them behind your table. Have them, have them in a bag or a suitcase or whatnot. And this is where, if somebody comes in, this is where we're going to circle back to the beginning, where your fellow artisans who are in the same field of study, or somebody who really wants to know something. You know what? It's like, hey, you know what? I got this book right here, and you reach in, you pull out this book, and you're like, hey, look, this page right here. This is where they talk about this. And all of a sudden, you're engaged. You're having this conversation. It just kind of adds a deeper level of a connection with your fellow artists. So are there any questions on displays and documentation? The size I would keep to, so usually the competition will tell you what size, how much table space you're being provided. So you should make sure you are within that space. If you need more, you should contact them well ahead of time to know if more is available, or if you need special accommodations, make sure you contact them ahead of time and make sure that those are available. Okay. So what you would want to do, I would suggest elevate your small thing so that it's higher on the table than everything else. I think average, I would say, is 3 by 3. But so small, circle back to the small thing. So we have a small, so the question is, would it be reason, how do I maximize table space for a small project? So what I would suggest is elevate your small project. For example, if it's a ring, maybe you have like a finger display, or if it's, a piece of jewelry, once again, have that appropriate display for it. And then I would have, maybe, let's say if it was like chain that you've been working on and you have examples, I would lay them out in front of it. And you can have, maybe you did different examples with different materials. Maybe you have your tools. So this is really where all those extra little pieces will come in and bring it to life. This is also where you could potentially, if your exemplar is available, maybe you would have a picture of your exemplar standing up somewhere, like in the background, like, or somewhere not too far from your actual piece, so people can have a look and they can see and compare, to have that visual present. If you have like it more specific to like a specific small thing, we can like talk about that. So judging. Judging is probably the most nerve-wracking part of any competition. And this is true not just for entrants, but this is true also for judges. By entering the A&S competition, you are consenting to receive constructive feedback from your judging team. Some competitions will have you sign or e-sign an agreement to that effect, and the judges may be asked to sign the same type of agreement to provide constructive feedback. Depending on the type of the competition, the number of judges available, there may or may not be a judge with knowledge of the exact thing you are presenting. If this happens, have your documentation closely follow the judging criteria to make it easier for the judges. So you want to have the spiel. You want to have a 5 to 10 minute spiel prepared on your project to explain it to the judges. Talk about your inspiration, talk about your successes and failures, try to briefly touch upon each of the judging criteria, and this will show, and this is the show and tell portion of the judging. And do not be afraid to refer to parts of your display when discussing this project. I mean, if this is where you want to like take the piece, put it into the judge's hands, if that is something that can be done, or you want to point out and say, see this, check this thing out right there. This is where you really want to bring attention to certain parts of your display. If your project can be handled or consumed, offer it to the judges to do so. Save the rest of the time of your judging slot for a discussion. This is where the judges will ask you questions, and you want to answer their questions to the best of your ability. It is okay to refer back to your documentation to answer these questions. And if something is not in your documentation, it is also okay to tell them to answer the questions, even if it's not in your documentation, because verbal documentation is still documentation. And this so anything that missed the documentation, this is where you point it out. Now, scoring and feedback. After the judges scored your entry, they will meet up with you again, and they will provide some feedback. Remember that the judge's goal is to evaluate your work based on the competition criteria and to give you constructive feedback. They are trying to be fair, and they're trying to be helpful in their feedback. Do your best to view any criticism that you get as an opportunity to improve and grow, and review any feedback with the assumption that it is provided in the spirit of helpfulness. So come into this looking at this, always come into this with looking at the positive outside of things. Judges will also often be happy to discuss with you your project further after the competition, and will want to see what the next thing you have done and created to show how you have grown. I have literally hunted down my judges after the competition, after I did like the next thing, and I'm like, hey, remember you told me to do this thing and to try this? I did it, and this is what it looks like, and this is what I did, and this is what I think about it. What do you think? You should walk away from any competition with feedback that will give you some next steps on how to better your project and some next steps that you can take. Now, what if I have a bad judging? This happens, unfortunately, happened to me. I'm sure it has happened to other people. In general, the A&S community has taken great strides to make sure that the competitors have as positive of an experience as possible. I have seen, in the East specifically, I have seen great strides taken for this through multiple A&S competitions. In the East, the MOAS officers offer training sessions for judges when the A&S rubric is used to help judges calibrate and to help them be as fair as possible, so the judging goes as smoothly as possible. But it does not always work out as planned, and if you have a bad judging, there are a few things you can do. First of all, remember to always be courteous and polite. Address it with your judges. If you have questions or concerns about your score, address it with the judging team during the feedback session or just after at the event. Do not just remain confused and unhappy without speaking up. Get an explanation from your judging team so that you know how you can improve next time. You can also talk to the competition organizers. Let them know if you had a bad judging experience. If they do not know that there is an issue, they would not be able to fix it. And chances are the competition organizers will appreciate your feedback. Finally, if you have a peer or mentor, discuss it with them. They will also be able to talk you through this and, guide you past it and advise on some next steps and also potentially advise on your behalf. You can also potentially, you could vent to your friends. I would do so in private. I mean, I would not recommend something like going on a, Kingdom Facebook page and making a big rant about things that may not work out in your favor. But yeah, sometimes we want to talk to our friends and just, just complain. Venting, it happens. We all do it. It's okay. Now, the competition postmortem. After the competition, take some time to reflect on your experience and figure out what the next steps are. Ask yourself some questions. What did you learn? Chances are you will learn something about yourself and about your art. Where would you like to see your research go next? Do you want to follow some of the judges' suggestions and take your research to the next level? Do you want to put the current project on the back burner and try your hand at something new? Maybe you saw something at the competition that ignited your passion. What can you do to improve next time? Set some goals for yourself to work towards that for the next time you decide to enter. Do you want to enter another competition? It is okay to not want to enter one ever again. That is perfectly fine. There are other ways to share your work, such as A&S displays, publications, teaching classes, etc. And you may also decide that you want to judge a competition to get a better feel for what the other side of the process feels like. The only way to get better at A&S competitions is to keep creating art and to keep entering. You may not get it perfect the first time around, but you grow every time in your art and as a competitor, and that's how you progress. So does anyone have any questions? No, I do not mean the East Kingdom Facebook group. No, you definitely, that is not, yeah. So any other questions about any parts of it, or maybe something that wasn't covered, or if you have like just some questions about something very specific? Okay.
I do have another little question, and again, it's going back to like setting up your display. And
Sure.
I figure now it's okay to just unmute myself instead of trying to type it all out. So like you had talked when Sheva had commented about like small things. But what about things that are not necessarily easy to display? Say you've done some needlework, like a drawn handkerchief, or pattern darned something, or even like tablet woven bands or something like that. Do you have any suggestions on how best to create a display about something that's like not doesn't really fit into like any other kind of thing? I don't know how to describe it. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm trying to think like, so this is where I would go vertical, and I would try to display the piece vertical or in the slant. So perhaps like if I have a handkerchief, I would like, my thing would be like, all right, so I want to put that handkerchief in front of everybody. So I would like maybe like do a slanted board and like pin it,
Okay.
Because I'm assuming you may want people to be able to pick it up and examine it closely.
Right.
So that's where like maybe like putting a pin, or even if it's just like maybe if you have like a piece of velvet fabric that you stretch over cardboard or something, so that's your slant and then it lays on that, so the fibers of the velvet will catch it, but then like somebody can pick it up and look at it, and it's not laying flat with like everything else that you have on your display.
Okay, great, thank you.
No problem.
So you know how there's like peer fear You know, everyone's
Yes.
scared. It's like, so I have criticism fear. Like, it's I even went to Heather's, you know, consent for criticism in A&S and or consent for constructive criticism in A&S, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. I'm always that person that takes what you say and I take it to heart and I want to cry. And so it's always really hard for me to take that constructive criticism. So how can I help the judges help me and not make me want to go to a corner and like sort of like huddle down? Do you have any advice like that? If not, that's cool. I mean, it's a totally different aspect of A&S.
See, I personally think like I don't know.
That's okay. This can be like a round table discussion. If anyone
Yeah.
here
So
has anything.
because like to me, like if you need to like walk away and cry about it, like I think that's okay. I mean, like I'm
I've
not gonna
done it.
judge you for it.
Like I've done it. I will absolutely own that. Lada's seen me do it.
I didn't
and-
want to say anything. So,
it is okay, because you know what, if you are putting up something that you've worked so many hours of your life on, and then you're getting feedback, and the feedback may not even be about, you know, you did anything wrong. It could just be about, you know, this is a mismatch with the competition, this is, you know, doesn't meet the judging criteria, this wasn't what we were looking for. It still, you know, is hard to, you know, have that be the end of the process, right? And our bodies, you know, just crying is a natural reaction. So while I understand why people maybe don't want to do that, there's nothing wrong with going and having a good cathartic cry in a corner somewhere, and then coming back and trying to process that information, because that is actually where, you know, go cry, and then the growth comes after that, when you can actually like process what they're saying.
Right. Yes. Yes.
yeah, because like I'm gonna say now, like I am on the opposite end of that spectrum. I am where like, no, you can tell me that you can be really hard on me. Like I am okay dealing with that, what is called the Russian judge, or like like I am okay with that, and then I will go and I will process it, and like, you know, chances are I may grow from that more than I will from anything else. So
I'm also going to say that I think in the East Kingdom, in the A&S world, in the competitions that we kind of, I don't want to say have control over, but like, you know, definitely are training people to run. We also really talk about what constructive feedback looks like. And, you know, it's never going to be something like we're just tearing your piece apart. Like, you know, we're going to acknowledge what you did well. You know, that's what an ideal bit of feedback would look like. You know, here's what you did well. Here are some things if you want to take this to the next step. And based on how you're reacting to that, that person may give you more or less. Because if you're like, no, I'm just here for today and I don't want any more, thank you very much, like that's okay, you know, but they're going to give you some nominal level of feedback. It is okay to say, you know what, I can't handle this right now, and walk away from it if you're not, you know, in a good place.
What if the person giving you the feedback isn't being kind and constructive, and they are just tearing you down, or it's coming across like they're tearing you down? Because the perception is huge. Like I've been in that space too, and actually I haven't entered even displays in a very long time because of that. And yeah, and that's like, it's terrifying for me.
I think I'm sorry this has happened to you. First of all, because like that should not happen. And I am speaking as somebody who has done that, not in the SCA world, but I have done that in art school, and I had to learn very quickly what, you know, constructive criticism and feedback is, because like not everybody knows how to do that. It's a learned skill. When I came to this country, I did not know what it was, because this was not something that, I grew up with. I think it's important to communicate to your judge that that's how, or your judges, that that's how they're coming across. And if you're not comfortable, because I understand in that moment it could be very emotional and very hard to like speak up and advocate for yourself. You want talk to the competition organizers afterwards, or like right after that, talk to your peer, talk, or any peers that you are close with, and that's definitely something that the goal is that that person should eventually understand that this is how they're coming across, and hopefully they will learn and they will improve.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Also, I think this is why Lada's okay with the Russian judge, because Lada is the Russian judge.
Oh,
yes. Well, and I try very for me, it's always like, am I being too harsh? Like I'm always asking myself that. So, so yeah, so that's why I guess, because I am the Russian judge, I try very hard to like make sure, like, hey, am I being positive enough? Like how am I coming across?
I mean, I don't mind someone like telling me like truthfully where I can improve, but like I don't want someone to be like, oh, there's no room for improvement here, like, and not in a positive way. Like I don't know how to explain it, but it's just it gets very hard to hear over and over, and I know it's not the norm nowadays, and I've had some really good conversations with my peer about it, but it's also very hard because like people know my peer, and so I'm also get compared to her, and we have completely different disciplines, and so it's like, ah. So, well, thank you.
No problem. And I also think it's important that with that feedback, that like that very like that very that if it's a feedback saying that you really need to work on these things, and that like somebody who's tearing you down, I mean, they better be very familiar with the subject matter, right? Like if that makes any sense,
It does.
yeah, if it's like a lot of criticism, that person better really know what they're talking about.
Right. Okay. Thank
Because
you.
otherwise it's almost like, what, if they're not, I think it's okay to just ignore it, just let it go past your head and be like, yeah, okay, thanks for your feedback, like walk away.
And that's where the crying in the corner comes in.
So I also found,
yes, I have been there too.
So this is both to Astrid and to Sheva. I have found that one way to sometimes deal with some of those comments, because definitely the first time I competed, there were some people coming by, and the art that I compete with is not something that a lot of people are familiar with. And so I found the phrase, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, to be a very, very helpful phrase to have ready at hand.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, thank you for your thank you for your feedback, like just some kind of version of that, whatever is comfortable for you. Just yep, just have that
my
handy.
last email.
Yes, exactly. This has been a really wonderful class. Thank you so much, Lada, and thank you, Heather, for this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Before we stop recording, last call, any other questions for Mistress Lada on the subject of A&S competitions? All right, then I will say thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Lada, for teaching this class, and I'm going to stop recording. Go away.